In the late years of the 15th century and the early years of the 16th century, the city of Rome stood at the center of European politics, religion, and ambition. The Vatican was not only a spiritual institution but also a throne that shaped kings, destroyed kingdoms, and controlled the lives of millions. At the heart of this powerful world stood the Borgia family, led by Pope Alexander VI and his son Cesare Borgia. Before we delve into these overlooked tales of endurance and pain, if you find yourself drawn to the hidden corners of history, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I am always amazed that we can explore these ancient narratives together, no matter where we are in the world, united by our curiosity about the past. The Borgias had risen through the ranks of the church by combining political strategy, wealth, private alliances, and a willingness to remove any obstacle that threatened their power. To many nobles across Europe, they were a symbol of authority mixed with danger. Their name carried both fear and fascination. Inside the Vatican, their influence touched every corridor, every council, and every important decision. Among the members of the family was Lucrezia Borgia, a young woman whose life had been shaped entirely by her father and brother. She was intelligent, educated, and graceful, yet she possessed almost no control over her own fate. Each of her marriages had been arranged for political advantage, and each one had ended under circumstances that many suspected were orchestrated by the Borgias themselves. Her first husband had fled Rome under fear for his life, and her second husband had died violently in the Vatican after losing his value to her father and brother. Although Europe often described Lucrezia as powerful or manipulative, those closest to her understood that she was a pawn in a much larger game. In the year 1503, the Pope decided that she would marry again. This time her husband would be Alfonso d'Este, the heir to the Duchy of Ferrara, one of the most respected and ancient noble families of northern Italy. To outside observers, this alliance looked like a brilliant political victory. It tied the Borgias to one of the oldest ruling houses on the peninsula and strengthened their influence across Italy. However, inside the d'Este family, the news brought dread. Alfonso d'Este understood the fate of Lucrezia's previous husbands. He was aware that marriage into the Borgia family meant stepping into a world dominated by threats, manipulation, and political traps. He attempted to delay the arrangement through diplomatic excuses and appeals, but his efforts failed. The Pope sent repeated messages demanding obedience, and Cesare Borgia stood ready with armies that had already conquered several Italian states. If the d'Este family refused, Ferrara could be invaded and destroyed. Excommunication, a powerful spiritual and political weapon, would isolate the duchy from all allies. The danger was obvious. Resistance would lead to ruin. Under this pressure, Alfonso was forced to accept the alliance. He prepared for a journey to Rome that felt less like a celebration and more like a surrender. His family was aware that he might be stepping into a place where honor held little value and where power overshadowed every other principle. While Alfonso traveled from Ferrara to Rome, Lucrezia lived in the papal apartments with a heavy heart. Despite the image that Europe projected onto her, she had endured manipulation and loss, and she carried the weight of past tragedies silently. Her attendants spoke of her sorrow and her fear, which grew stronger as preparations for the new marriage progressed. The Vatican was filled with whispers, unusual movements, and an atmosphere that felt tense and unsettling. Servants avoided eye contact, cardinals spoke in hushed voices, and the halls seemed alive with rumors. One of the few observers who understood the seriousness of the situation was Johann Burchard, the Vatican master of ceremonies. He was responsible for organizing events, recording important moments, and ensuring that every ritual followed the proper form. Over the years, he had witnessed many questionable actions under the reign of Pope Alexander VI, including political deals, lavish celebrations, and actions that many believed were improper for the head of the church. However, in the weeks leading to the wedding of Lucrezia and Alfonso, he sensed something different. The atmosphere felt heavy, and he believed that the event would overshadow every earlier scandal. When Alfonso finally reached Rome, the Vatican greeted him with elaborate ceremony. Yet behind every smile he saw a warning. Pope Alexander VI welcomed him on a throne that glowed with gold and light, while Cesare Borgia stood at his side, silent and intimidating. Alfonso felt the weight of their presence immediately. He was not entering as a partner. He was entering as a subject under their control. During the weeks that followed, Alfonso experienced the tension of being in the hands of the Borgias. Feasts, hunts, and public events were held, but beneath the surface each moment was designed to humiliate him and to show him that resistance was impossible. The Pope reminded him of the unfortunate fates of Lucrezia's former husbands. Cesare demonstrated skill and dominance in every activity, making it clear that he held the power of life and death. Guards watched Alfonso day and night. He was never alone and never free to make his own choices. While Alfonso endured this quiet pressure, the Vatican prepared for the wedding with unusual secrecy. Meetings were held behind closed doors, certain corridors were restricted, and selected individuals were brought into the palace for reasons that were never publicly explained. Servants whispered of instructions that they did not fully understand. Lucrezia noticed the rising tension and sensed danger, but she had no voice in the decisions of her father or brother. As the wedding day approached, Rome filled with visitors who came to witness the union. The city was alive with decoration and activity, yet inside the Vatican the atmosphere remained tense. Many cardinals and officials feared what the Borgias might plan, yet none dared to oppose them. By the morning of the ceremony, the situation felt like a storm waiting to break, and both bride and groom were caught in the center with no ability to escape. The last days of October brought cold winds to Rome. The city awaited the grand wedding with curiosity, fear, and excitement. The Borgias understood that this event would send a message to Italy, and they wished to display their power with maximum effect. The Vatican halls were decorated with fine fabrics, frescoes, gold objects, and long banquet tables covered with food from across the region. Cardinals in rich garments walked through the palace, and noble visitors from many cities arrived to witness the occasion. Lucrezia was prepared by her attendants with great care. She wore a gown of shining silk embroidered with gold thread, and her long hair was woven with pearls. However, beneath the surface of elegance she carried deep fear. She saw her reflection not as a bride but as a sacrifice to forces she could not fight. Her life had been shaped by political demands, and she sensed that this wedding would become another example of how little control she had over her own destiny. The ceremony took place in one of the grand chapels of the Vatican. Pope Alexander VI personally conducted the union of Alfonso and Lucrezia. His voice echoed across the hall while cardinals stood in long rows, their expressions perfectly arranged but filled with internal unease. None of them could express their discomfort openly, for the Borgias ruled through intimidation, and opposition often led to grave consequences. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the papal apartments for the wedding banquet. The atmosphere was bright at first. Musicians played gentle melodies, servants carried trays filled with fruit and wine, and nobles exchanged polite greetings. However, beneath the surface it was clear that many guests were uneasy. They had heard the rumors. They had witnessed the behavior of the Pope and Cesare in earlier events. They felt that the night might take a troubling turn. As the evening progressed, the energy in the hall changed. Pope Alexander VI grew louder and more animated, while Cesare watched the guests with calculating attention. The doors were closed, and guards took positions that made it clear that no one was allowed to leave. The atmosphere became heavy and suffocating. Many guests sensed that the celebration was no longer an ordinary noble feast, but a demonstration of control and authority by a family that ruled through fear. The true purpose of the night soon became apparent. The Pope and Cesare did not intend the wedding feast to be a simple celebration. They wished to use it as a display of dominance to remind the Este family, the Italian nobility, and the church leadership that the Borgias held absolute authority. The event shifted from a formal banquet into a political message made through humiliation and control. The message the Borgias intended to send was clear. Anyone who opposed them or questioned their decisions would face consequences that reached beyond political defeat. They used the wedding to demonstrate that their authority extended into every corner of the church and every noble family in Italy. Their control of the Vatican granted them a platform to display power in a way that no opposing force could easily challenge. In the days after the wedding, Rome buzzed with rumors. Word spread quickly through markets, taverns, and noble residences. The stories varied in detail, but all agreed on one point. The event had crossed boundaries that shocked even those familiar with the corruption of the era. Messengers carried reports to cities across Italy, and ambassadors wrote coded letters to their courts. The name of the Borgia family circulated with a new level of infamy. The Este family received Alfonso in Ferrara after his return from Rome. He carried a heavy silence, and he seldom spoke about the experience. The alliance had been completed, and the political purpose had been achieved, but the cost was profound. Alfonso withdrew into a life of caution and distance, and the marriage, although official, never healed from the wounds of its beginning. Lucrezia did her best to bring peace into her life in Ferrara. She supported artists, funded charities, and attempted to build a home that would bring stability to her children. Yet those who observed her privately noticed a sadness that never left her. The memories of her past in Rome shadowed her for the rest of her life, creating an emotional distance that no amount of devotion or effort could erase. In Europe, the scandal became fuel for critics of the Church. The early 16th century was a time of increasing tension within Christianity. Many scholars and theologians argued that the Church had lost its moral direction. The behavior of Pope Alexander VI and his family became a clear symbol of corruption. The reports of the wedding night in the Vatican played a role in shaping this criticism. Reformers used the story as evidence that the leadership of the Church had strayed far from the principles it claimed to represent. One of the individuals who later referenced the Borgia scandals was Martin Luther. As he developed his arguments that the Church needed reformation, he pointed to the moral decay within the Vatican as proof that change was necessary. Although the wedding night was only one example among many, it became one of the most infamous illustrations of how deeply the corruption had spread. Inside the Vatican, Johann Burchard completed his written account of the event. His record was detailed and precise, but he understood that it might either be hidden forever or eventually reveal truths that many wished to forget. For years, his writings remained buried among Vatican documents, but centuries later they resurfaced and became a crucial source for historians studying the Borgia era. His account confirmed that the political corruption of the time had reached extraordinary levels. The fall of the Borgia family came soon after the wedding. Pope Alexander VI died suddenly, and many believed that the poison he used so often against others had finally harmed him. Without the Pope's protection, Cesare Borgia lost his power rapidly. His enemies rose against him, and he fell in a violent ambush in Spain. His body was left in an unmarked grave, far from the glory he once believed was his destiny. Lucrezia lived longer than her father and brother, but her life remained marked by sorrow. She died at the age of 39 after complications from childbirth. Her final years were spent seeking peace through faith, charity, and devotion to her duties in Ferrara. Her last words expressed a desire for freedom, something that she had rarely experienced during her lifetime. The night of the wedding became a lasting symbol of the dangers of unchecked power. Historians and scholars studied the event as a warning about the consequences of ambition without moral restraint. The Borgia era served as evidence that institutions can fall into corruption when authority is used for personal gain rather than for public responsibility. The story of Lucrezia, Alfonso, and the Borgia family became a reminder that political ambition can inflict lasting harm on individuals and society. Even 5 centuries later, the memory of that night remains powerful. It stands as an example of how the highest places of authority can become corrupted when no one dares to challenge wrongdoing. It warns future generations that silence enables the growth of harmful power and that moral responsibility must guide those who lead.